There's a common misconception about closure. We're taught to believe it's a shared destination, a final conversation where hurts are acknowledged, apologies are given, and understanding is reached. We see it in movies, the dramatic, tearful scene where someone finally says, "I'm sorry," and the wound magically begins to heal. But some wounds are never granted that cinematic ending. Some of us are left standing at a train station, holding a ticket for a journey of reconciliation, waiting for a train that was never scheduled to arrive. My relationship with Jordan didn't end with a bang. It ended with a slow, silent erosion of my own reality. And the thing that haunts me, the ghost that has followed me for years, is not the hurt itself, but the utter, maddening silence that followed it. It's the story of the apology I needed, the one I deserved, and the one that never came. Jordan and I were together for 4 years. He was charismatic, ambitious, and brilliant. He had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the room. But he had a flaw, a deep, structural crack in his character that I mistook for strength for far too long. He was completely, pathologically incapable of admitting fault. The first time I saw it, the incident was small. We had plans to meet my parents for dinner. He was an hour late. He strolled in, unapologetic, blaming a meeting that ran long. Later that night, his phone buzzed with a text from his friend. "Great game, man. We have to do it again soon." He hadn't been in a meeting. He'd been playing basketball. When I confronted him with the text, my heart pounding with the simple hurt of a lie, he didn't apologize. He got defensive. "I can't believe you looked at my phone." He sighed, his voice cold. "What's wrong with you? Do you not trust me?" The conversation immediately pivoted from his lie to my betrayal of his privacy. By the end of it, he had so effectively twisted the narrative that I was the one who felt ashamed. I ended up apologizing to him. It was a masterful, dizzying act of emotional jujitsu, and it would become our defining pattern. This pattern repeated itself in ways both big and small. There was a time he forgot my birthday. When I brought it up, my voice thick with tears, he didn't say, "I'm so sorry, I messed up." He said, "You know how stressed I've been at work, Clara. You're being a little selfish to make this about you right now." There was a time he made a cruel, cutting joke about my career aspirations in front of our friends. When I told him later how much it had humiliated me, he shrugged. It was just a joke. "You're being way too sensitive." He never said, "I'm sorry I hurt you." He would only ever say, "I'm sorry you feel that way." It's a subtle but profound difference. The first is an admission of responsibility. The second is a dismissal of your feelings. It's a non-apology, a way of saying, the problem isn't what I did. The problem is your reaction to it. It was a form of gaslighting so subtle I didn't have a name for it at the time. All I knew was that every time I was hurt, I was made to feel like my pain was an unreasonable, irrational overreaction. My feelings were never validated. They were treated as an inconvenience. The biggest hurt, the one that led to the end, was a betrayal of trust that went to the core of our shared future. We had been saving for a down payment on a house. For 2 years, we had diligently put money into a joint savings account. It was our dream. One day, I logged into the account and saw that over half of the money, nearly $15,000, was gone. When I confronted him, my hands shaking as I held up the bank statement, he didn't even flinch. He calmly explained that he had borrowed the money to invest in a sure thing, a high-risk stock his friend had told him about. He hadn't asked me. He hadn't even told me. He had taken our shared future and gambled with it. How could you do this without talking to me, Jordan? I asked, my voice breaking. I was going to surprise you when the investment paid off, he said, as if it were a grand romantic gesture. You don't understand finance. You would have just worried for nothing. I was handling it. The stock, of course, had tanked. The money was gone. And he stood there, explaining it away with no remorse, no apology. He spoke of the lost money as an unfortunate market fluctuation, not as a catastrophic breach of trust. In that moment, I saw him clearly. He would never change. He would never see my pain as valid. He would never, ever say he was sorry. And I knew with a certainty that was both heartbreaking and liberating, but I could not build a life with a person who would not acknowledge the wounds they inflicted. I left him a week later. The breakup itself was calm, almost sterile. He couldn't understand why the investment issue was a deal breaker. He accused me of overreacting, of being emotional. Even as I was packing my last box, he never once apologized for what he did. His final words to me were, "I guess I'm sorry this is how you choose to see things." The months that followed were a quiet, lonely hell. I was grieving not just the loss of the relationship, but the loss of any sense of justice or closure. The absence of an apology creates a vacuum. You're left alone with your pain and a voice in your head. A voice that sounds suspiciously like his starts to whisper, "Maybe he was right. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you did overreact." You begin to doubt your own reality, your own feelings. The wound can't heal because you're not even sure if you have the right to be wounded. I did something I'm not proud of. About 6 months after we broke up, I wrote him a letter. I poured my heart out onto a dozen pages. I detailed every hurt, every dismissal, every time he had made me feel small or crazy. I explained exactly why what he did was so damaging. It was a raw, vulnerable plea for acknowledgement. I ended the letter by writing, "I don't need us to get back together. I just need you to understand. I just need you to say you're sorry." I mailed it, and for the next 2 weeks, I checked my email and my mailbox with a frantic, desperate hope. He never responded. That silence was his final answer. And it was in that profound, echoing silence that I finally had my epiphany. I had been waiting for him to validate my pain. I had been waiting for him to give me permission to be hurt. I was handing him the power over my own emotional reality. He was the one who had hurt me, and yet I was still waiting for him to tell me it was okay to cry. My closure, I realized, could not be dependent on his character. He was incapable of giving me what I needed. It was like trying to draw water from a dry well. The only person who could validate my feelings was me. The only person who could give me permission to heal was me. It was a slow process. I started journaling, writing down my experiences not as a plea to him, but as a statement of fact for myself. He lied. That was not okay. He spent our shared savings. That was a betrayal. He dismissed my feelings. That was cruel. I became my own witness. I started going to therapy where a kind, neutral party listened and said the words I'd been desperate to hear. "Your feelings are valid. You are not overreacting." I had to learn to apologize to myself. I had to forgive myself for not leaving sooner, for not seeing the red flags, for believing that my love could somehow fix his fundamental lack of empathy. I had to learn to be my own advocate, my own comforter. It's been years now. I'm in a new, healthy relationship with a man who, when he hurts my feelings, looks at me with genuine remorse and says the simple, beautiful, healing words, "I'm sorry. I messed up. How can I make it right?" The first time he said it, I almost cried from the sheer relief of it. I don't hate Jordan. I feel a sort of detached pity for him. He is trapped in a prison of his own ego, unable to experience the deep connection that comes from vulnerability and accountability. He will never know the freedom of a true apology, but I am free. I learned that closure is not a gift someone else gives you. It's not a conversation or a letter. It's a quiet internal decision. It's the moment you stop waiting for the train to arrive and you turn around, walk out of a station, and build your own path home. It's the moment you realize that your pain is real and valid with or without an apology. And that validation is the only one that ever truly matters. The years that followed my decision to find closure within myself were years of quiet, steady growth. My relationship with Ben was a revelation. It was a partnership built on the foreign. Concepts of mutual respect, open communication, and sincere accountability. The first time we had a real disagreement, I remember bracing for the inevitable pivot. The defensive anger, the way the blame would be subtly shifted onto me. Instead, after a tense conversation, Ben looked at me, his expression open and earnest, and said, "You're right. I see your point. I'm sorry I was being defensive." Those simple words, "I'm sorry," landed with the force of a tectonic plate shifting inside me. It was so easy, so clean. There was no psychological warfare, no emotional price to be paid. Just an acknowledgement of my feelings and a commitment to do better. It was in these small, healthy moments that the ghost of Jordan and his non-apologies finally truly faded. I had built a new life, a new reality where my feelings were not only valid but cherished. I was happy. I was at peace. The past was a scar that no longer ached. And then on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 7 years after I had walked out of his life, an email appeared in my inbox. It was from an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line made my heart stop. It was just 2 words. For Clara. I stared at it for a long time, a strange sense of unreality washing over me. It felt like an artifact from another dimension, a message from a ghost. A part of me wanted to delete it immediately, to leave the past undisturbed. But a stronger part, a part that was no longer afraid, was curious. I clicked it open. The email was long, and it was from Jordan. "Clara," it began. "I have no right to send this. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, and I am certainly not expecting a reply. After years of therapy, I've come to understand that forgiveness is not something I'm entitled to, but I am writing this as an act of accountability, a truth I should have offered you a decade ago. I was a coward. What I did to you wasn't just a series of mistakes. It was a campaign of emotional abuse rooted in my own narcissism and a deep-seated inability to admit fault. I gaslit you. I made you believe your valid feelings were a form of hysteria. I made you question your own reality to protect my fragile ego. When I forgot your birthday, it wasn't because I was stressed. It was because I was selfish. When I made that joke about your career, it wasn't a joke. It was a cruel attempt to make myself feel bigger by making you feel smaller. And the money? There is no excuse. It was theft. A profound betrayal of the trust you had placed in me and the future we were supposed to be building. It was the act of a desperate, entitled man-child who refused to take responsibility for his own failures. Your pain, your anger, your decision to leave Olive. It was not just valid. It was the only sane response to the way I treated you. I'm not that man anymore. Or at least, I spend every day trying not to be. I am in a new relationship now, and I'm learning how to say, "I'm sorry," and actually mean it. I am learning that real strength is in vulnerability, not in deflecting blame. I know this letter changes nothing. The damage is done, but I needed to send it. I needed to state the truth, clearly and without excuses, at least once. You deserve so much better than the man I was. I hope, wherever you are, that you have found the happiness and peace that you always deserved. I finished reading and leaned back in my chair, my breath catching in my throat. It was the letter. The perfect letter. It was the apology I had once craved with every fiber of my being. The words I had wept for, written letters for, begged the universe for. It was a full confession, a complete validation of my entire experience. 7 years too late, the train had finally arrived at the station, and I felt nothing. No, that's not right. I didn't feel nothing. I felt a profound, quiet, and deeply detached sadness. Not for myself, but for the woman I used to be. The woman who had needed this letter so desperately to feel whole. I felt a wave of compassion for that version of me who had anchored her healing to the hope that this man would one day wake up and see the hurt he had caused. When Ben came home that evening, I showed him the email. He read it silently, his expression serious. When he was done, he didn't ask what Jordan wanted, or if I was okay. He just asked the only question that mattered. "How do you feel about it?" "I feel distant," I said, and the word felt right. "I feel like I just read a letter that was addressed to someone who moved away a long time ago." "She doesn't." live here anymore. Do you think you'll respond? He asked. That was the question I had been wrestling with for hours. The old me, the one who still had a score to settle, would have wanted to write back to have the last word, to say, I told you so. But what was the point? What would a response accomplish? I realized then that his apology, as sincere as it may have seemed, was not about me. It was about him. It was a step in his healing journey, a way for him to find peace, to absolve himself, so he could be a better man in his new life. And I was under no obligation to participate in his redemption arc. My story was no longer intertwined with his. Responding would be like re-entering a conversation that had ended years ago. It would be acknowledging that his words still had power over my emotional state, and they didn't. The power had been cut. My closure wasn't a dialogue, it was a monologue. It was a decision I had made for myself, by myself, in the quiet. Of my own heart long ago. So I did something simple. I didn't reply, I didn't delete the email in a fit of anger. I didn't block his address. I simply moved the email from my inbox to my archive folder. I filed it away, a historical document. From a closed case. It was a fact, a piece of evidence that the past had indeed happened, but it was no longer an active part of my present. It had no power. That night, Ben and I cooked dinner together. We chopped vegetables side by side, the easy rhythm of our partnership a quiet comfort. We talked about our day, about a trip we were planning, about the funny thing our dog did. The past was a million miles away. I had once believed that my healing was a locked door, and that only Jordan held the key of an apology. But I was wrong. The door was never locked. I could have walked through it at any time. The real work was convincing myself that I didn't need his permission to be free. The letter, when it finally came, was just a faint knock on the door of a house I no longer lived in. I was already outside in the sun, tending my own garden. And I was finally, completely, at peace. Of course. A story about healing often finds its truest conclusion when the healed person has the chance to use their wisdom to help someone else. Here is a final part to Clara's story. Another 2 years passed. The email from Jordan remained in my archive. A digital artifact from a past life. It was a strange and quiet truth that the apology I had once craved with my entire soul had become completely irrelevant to my happiness. My life with Ben was a world away from that old pain. It was a life built on the steady ground of mutual respect, easy laughter, and the simple, profound comfort of apologies that were given freely and sincerely when they were needed. The peace I felt was no longer new or fragile. It was a deep, settled part of me. I thought the lessons from my time with Jordan were for me alone, a private textbook on survival. I never imagined I would have to teach the class. The conflict arrived as they so often do, disguised as a family matter. Ben's younger brother, Sam, had always been the charming, reckless one of the family. Ben, ever the responsible older. Brother had always been his safety net. One evening, Ben came home from having dinner with him, his face etched with a familiar look of hurt and confusion that sent a chill down my spine. He told me that, a few months prior, he had loaned Sam a significant amount of money, $5,000. Sam had sworn it was an emergency, a deposit he needed for a new apartment after his landlord sold his building. Ben, being Ben, gave it to him without a second thought. But that night at dinner, Sam had casually mentioned a recent lavish week-long trip to Costa Rica he'd taken with his new girlfriend. When Ben, confused, asked how he'd afforded it and what had happened with the apartment emergency, Sam had laughed it off. "Oh, that apartment thing fell through," Sam said dismissively. And this was a once-in-a-lifetime deal. You know, how it is, I'll pay you back when I can. Ben tried to explain that it wasn't just about the money. It was about the lie, the breach of trust. He had given that money in good faith for an emergency, not for a vacation. Sam's reaction was a masterclass in deflection. He got defensive. He accused Ben of being controlling and acting like dad. He said, "It's not a big deal, bro. You have plenty of money. Why are you making this into such a drama?" He never once acknowledged the deceit. He never apologized. Ben was devastated. For the next few weeks, I watched as my kind, rational husband was consumed by the same maddening loop that had once been my personal prison. He would replay the conversation over and over. He'd draft long, pleading text messages to Sam, trying to make him understand, only to delete them. "I just don't get it, Clara," he said to me one night, staring at the ceiling. "All he has to do is say he's sorry, that he messed up. Is that so hard? I feel like I'm going crazy. He's making me feel like I'm the unreasonable one for being upset." Listening to him, I felt a painful, visceral shock of recognition. He was speaking my language. He was describing the exact emotional labyrinth I had been lost in for years. He was waiting for an apology from someone who was incapable of giving one. He was looking for closure from a person who refused to acknowledge the wound they had inflicted. I saw my opportunity, my responsibility. I had a map of this terrible country, a map drawn in my own tears. And I could give it to him. That weekend, I sat him down on our porch. "Ben," I began gently, "I want you to forget for a moment that this is about Sam or the money. I want to talk about what you're feeling. You feel like your reality isn't being acknowledged, right? You're looking for a simple admission of truth, and instead, you're being told your feelings are an overreaction." He looked at me, his eyes full of pain. "Yes, exactly. I lived in that place for 4 years," I said softly. "The land of the non-apology. It's a place designed to make you question your own sanity. And I can tell you from painful experience that you can stand at that border forever waiting for someone to grant you a visa, but they will never let you in." I told him about my own journey, not about the specifics of Jordan's betrayals, but about the psychological trap of needing validation from the person who hurt you. I told him about the letter I wrote, the years I spent waiting, and the final, quiet epiphany that had set me free. You can't make Sam have a conscience, just like I couldn't make Jordan have one, I explained. His inability to apologize is not a reflection of your worth or the validity of your hurt. It's a reflection of his own character, his own limitations. Waiting for him to give you closure is letting him control your peace of mind, even now. "So, what do I do?" he asked, his voice full of frustration. "Just let it go? Pretend it didn't happen?" "No," I said. "You don't let it go, you reclaim it. You give the closure to yourself. You become your own judge and jury. You say to yourself, he betrayed my trust. My feelings of hurt and anger are completely valid. What he did was wrong. You don't need his signature to ratify that truth. It's already true." We talked for hours. I gave him the tools that my therapist and my own painful journey had given me. I explained the concept of detaching with love, of setting a boundary not to punish the other person, but to protect yourself. A few days later, Ben called his brother. I heard his side of the conversation. It was calm, firm, and free of anger. "Sam," he said, "I'm not going to argue about the money or the trip anymore. I just want to tell you that what you did deeply hurt me and it broke my trust in you. I need to take a step back from our relationship for a while to process that. I love you, but I can't have this kind of dishonesty in my life right now." He didn't wait for a response. He just said, "I hope you understand," and hung up. He had taken his power back. He had found closure not in a confrontation, but in a quiet declaration of his own reality and his own boundaries. He came and sat next to me on the couch, a look of profound relief on his face. He took my hand. "Thank you," he said. In that moment, I felt the last of my own ghosts finally fade into nothing. The years of pain, the feeling of being crazy and alone, the maddening search for an apology, it had all been transmuted. It was no longer just my story of survival. It was now a source of wisdom, a map I could share with the person I loved most. The deepest wound from my past had become a tool to heal my present. The story wasn't about the man who never apologized anymore. It was about the woman who learned that her own validation was the only one that ever mattered, and the incredible healing power that came from finally being able to give that gift to someone else.